We'll move on to a team that last year, if we were to rewind to the beginning of the season, they were one of the top teams in the country. They had crazy high expectations, and there was hope that they would be able to build off the performance from the 2023 campaign when they were undefeated in the regular season before falling in the bowl game to the Georgia Bulldogs. That is the Florida State Seminoles. There's only one direction to go for Mike Norvell and the Noles. That's up, because it can't get any worse than the 2-10 season they experienced last year. I, however, think that there is a sliver of optimism to be had for the team this season. First things first, they flipped the staff. So when things fall off a cliff, you got to really look internally, and are we getting the best possible coaching for our offense and defense? Mike Norvell determined that they weren't. He also determined that I need to go bring in an experienced play caller so that I can completely delegate the responsibilities of calling the plays to Gus Malzahn. So Gus Malzahn, the former UCF head coach, but a long time, I guess you could say, guru offensively when it comes to calling plays. He now will be directing the offense for the Seminoles. And then on defense, they went and looked everywhere, and they identified Tony White, the defensive coordinator at Nebraska. Prior to that, he was at Syracuse. He's going to be the guy running the defense side of the football. Let's start on offense, though, because that's where I'm most optimistic. Because if you look at the offense last year, man, it fell off a cliff. I mean, to think what they were 2 years ago offensively to what they were last season. They were 132nd in the country on offense last year. They averaged 2.85 yards per carry on offense. The Florida State Seminoles, you heard that right. They averaged 2.85 yards per carry. That was 132nd. What does Gus Malzahn do as well as anybody? He creates advantages in the run game. That's what he's done all the way dating back to his time at Springdale High School in Arkansas, to Auburn, to becoming the head coach at Arkansas State, then the head coach at Auburn, and then the UCF head coach. Gus Malzahn's always going to make running the football a priority. That's what he does. He's one of the best in the country at it. So, identifying the weaknesses of last year's team and their inability to run the football, you go out and bring in a guy that has long excelled creating big yardage and a lot of points because of his run schemes. I love the marriage, though, that Gus Malzahn's going to have with his new quarterback. And if you look at Gus Malzahn's time as a play caller, when he's been most dangerous, when he's had a super dynamic quarterback in the run game, a guy that can take off and do a lot of dangerous things with the ball in his hands in his own right. And who is that guy for Florida State? It's Thomas Castellanos, the transfer from Boston College. Now, Castellanos has familiarity with the system, by the way. He started his career at UCF under Gus Malzahn, and he's one of the best ball carriers in the country at the quarterback position. Remember, just 2 years ago, Florida State fans should remember this. Florida State, that version of Florida State with Jared Verse and guys that went on to play, and Braden Fisk, and these guys that went on to have one of the best defenses in the country, Thomas Castellanos nearly pulled the upset there at Boston College against the Seminoles. On third down by itself, he rushed for 94 yards in that game against the Noles. And that was an undefeated Seminole team that was one of the best defenses in the country, and Thomas Castellanos almost single-handedly pulled off the outright upset. So they got to get the run game going. They go out and get a guy that caused them a lot of problems a couple years back, and a guy that is going to be really a good fit in this Malzahn offense running the football. Now, they also are going to need to take some of the pressure off the quarterback by running it with their running backs, because that group last year was extremely underwhelming. Now, Lawrence Toafili was a solid piece and has been forever, but he's now gone, which means you have some combination of Cam Davis, Roydell Williams, Jalen Lucas. Those are probably going to be the guys that will get the first crack. Now, Cam Davis, he's their top returner in terms of production, but he had less than 180 yards last season. He had just 3.3 yards per carry last season. Now, Roydell Williams played in only 4 games, but he is the most veteran guy. He's been around for a while, but he's not overwhelmingly dynamic. He's kind of a slasher. He's a one-cut runner. He's going to run with power. And then Jalen Lucas, who got hurt early, but there's been a lot of buzz about what he might be able to do here when he gets a little bit older and a little bit healthier, because he's got a lot of twitch and he's got a lot of explosiveness. I think they have immediately upgraded the wide receiver position, because that was a group last year that was remarkably underwhelming. Now, a lot of the vitriol is sprayed in the direction of the offensive line and the quarterback, understandably so. The offensive line was maybe their biggest problem. They do bring back a lot of guys that have played a lot of college football, but that's a group that collectively needs to play much better than they did a year ago. But the receivers can soften some of the looks they might have if you have to double cover Deuce Robinson, or if you got to account for Squirrel White in the slot. Now, Deuce Robinson is 6'6". He's big, he's physical, he's tremendous in the red zone. And I think they're going to utilize him similar to how they utilized their big body receivers 2 years ago in the 2023 season. Career-wise, he's got about 750 yards and 7 touchdowns. So he's got pretty decent credibility with time played there the last 2 seasons for the Trojans. But Squirrel White, he's got 131 career receptions. He's gone over 1,600 career yards. He's got a lot of top-end speed, but is probably going to primarily play in the slot. That's a really important position, though, for this offense, especially if they run the ball the way I think they're going to try to commit to running the football. Defensively, there's 2 things they must do a lot better this year. And they're going to be adjusting. We already talked about Tony White. He's going to be bringing in a new defensive structure, kind of a 3-3-5 alignment, but they'll have variety. They'll play a lot of different fronts. But there's 2 things they absolutely have to do that they did not do a very good job of last year. They have to first stop the run. They were 111th last year in opponent rushing yards a game. They gave up nearly 200 yards on the ground per game. That can't happen anymore. It's Florida State, for crying out loud. Stop the run. That's 1. Number 2, they have to force more turnovers. They forced just 6 turnovers all of last year. 12 games, 6 turnovers forced. That's not going to be good enough. Just for comparison's sake, they forced 17 in 2023. So nearly 3 times more the year before. 6 turnovers is just not nearly enough. And their offense turned the ball over a lot. They turned it over 22 times. So that's 6 turnovers and 22 that they had on their own. That led to a minus 16 turnover margin, which is one of the worst in college football last year. Now, their win total's at 7.5. That's a pretty significant jump from just 2 wins last year, but I actually think it's very gettable. Now, there are some difficult games on the schedule. You got Bama in the non-conference there in the early going. You also have to play Miami in the first weekend of October. But you do have a chance to take on the Florida Gators, which will be big. And it'll be very interesting, too, to see the rest of their schedule and how things play out. Florida State, I think, is a dangerous team this year. No one's really talking about them. But if you look at their roster, look at guys that will be starting for them this year, there's a lot of 4th and 5th year players in that starting lineup. Granted, it's a projected starting lineup right now, but the more veterans you have and the chip on their shoulder that the Seminoles are likely going to have coming off a disappointing 2024 campaign, I think you can expect a bounce back from Mike Norvell and his staff.